Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. This is Ukraine War new frontline update for the 21st of October 2024. Just trying to check when I did the last frontline update because it's been a couple of days since then. So here we go, 17th, no, we've done one since then. So the 19th, this is a 2-day update. So there's a slightly more than you gains for one side or the other than you would expect in a normal mapping updates because I'm struggling to get them out every single day. But yeah, so there's 2 days worth of changes here. If you don't know what the lines on my map mean, please check out the screen at the moment. Pause the video. Just to remind people, I'm doing a live tonight. It's going to be on my other channel. I'll put a link in the I'll do a post for this channel. I'm doing a live conversation with an expert on cults, and we're going to discuss that and US political landscape at the moment. So check that out. Anyway, frontline update. Let's go to the north first. We're going to go to the Kursk incursion here, or invasion, or whatever you want to call it. And we have an awful lot. Sorry, haven't worked out the label situation at the moment, so there are labels to each of these pins. Now, remember, we are dealing with 2 mappers here. The blue lines are the lines of Andrew Perpetua and his mapping, where he is saying that this is where the Russians have their defensive line. The orange line is the line of Suryat maps, and that is, in this case, in the Glushkovo area. This is Glushkovo area. This is where the Russians are defending. They're defending the border, and there are no Ukrainians north of the border there. Andrew Perpetua is saying, I'm actually thinking most of this is grey zone, and the Ukrainians may be operating in this whole area there. So really big difference between the mappers right across the front lines. Really, Kursk is one of the biggest areas. Now, what has been a big change recently is that Andrew Perpetua's drawn in, kind of all at once really, I guess here, a large area of the Russian control zone here in that northwestern part of their salient, and it's quite considerable. As you can see, there's a lot of pressure on the Ukrainians in this area. The Russians really pushing them back in that northwest particularly. And as you can see there, the Russians previously along this line there, and that actually signifies all of this area that they have taken back, pushing the Russian defensive line, the Ukrainians much further to the east. And of course, the Ukrainian defensive line, as according to Andrew Perpetua, is probably somewhere where Suryat Maps has the Russian defensive line and the grey zone in the middle. Okay, so a lot of pressure there, but there are some claims that if we look at the Institute for the Study of War daily report, actually this is on my website, the atpgeo.com. This is the AI summary of that distills it even further. So it's really concentrated factoids. We have the news of in the frontline summary that the Ukrainian operations into the Kursk Oblast have seen Ukrainian forces recently advancing north of Sudya amid continued fighting in Ukraine's main salient in Kursk Oblast on September the 20th. Geolocated footage published on the 20th indicates that the Ukrainian forces recently advanced east of Cherkasoye Porechnoye, north of Sudya. Neither Ukrainian nor Russian sources reported on ground attacks in the Glushkovo region, and that's that area there. So no reports of any attacks there. But Sudya is here, and then we have over in this neck of the woods, we have when it renders somewhere around here, Cherkaskoye. I'm going to have to find where that is. We've got Ruskoye. Here it is. That's Cherkaskoye. Konopelka. Well, luckily we have a geolocation of this, so it's probably that area that we're talking about there. There are different transliterations of these place names depending on what language you're using and how it's written in English. But if we go and plug and this, by the way, the geolocation states in the Sudya Maksymilianivka area. So Sudya is here. This is this main urban area that was one of the early targets for the Ukrainians. They eventually did take that. You got this road up there to Maksymilianivka, and yeah, so that's the area that is being talked about here. The claim is the positional combat operations in the Sudya area, shelling by the Russians on a Ukrainian position near Sudya on the Kursk-Sudya highway, expansion of the zone of control of the armed forces of Ukraine north of Maksymilianivka by 2.5 kilometers, clarification of the line of contact. So that is to say that north of here, so somewhere around, we're going to find out exactly where it is, the Ukrainians have made a 2.5 kilometer gain. And the reason I'm talking about this is because it's a rarity, right? Ukrainians gaining, it doesn't happen too often. So that is this area. That is to say the Ukrainians are controlling that area. So if we look at what both of the mappers are saying here, we have the Russian, this is the Russian line of control as according to Andrew Perpetua, and this is the Russian line of control as according to Suret map. So if the Ukrainians are here and getting shelled by the Russians, then you can rest assured that the Russian front line is probably not here. It's going to be somewhere over here. The idea is, because remember, the Ukrainians don't control all of this land up to the lines. This will be grey zone. So the idea is probably that without knowing about that gain, the Ukrainians are probably going to be somewhere. If we change that to a blue line to indicate the Ukrainians, they're probably going to be somewhere back here, right? This is going to be their defensive line. So for them to be up here indicates either that they have control of this area and they are still able to supply this forward position, or it's a deep reconnaissance group, or it's some kind of attack into the area and they don't necessarily control it. But what it would suggest is the Russian line is probably some way further back from where it is at the moment. So interesting little nugget there to suggest that Ukrainians are actually pushing the Russians further up that road. But on the other hand, they're losing a lot of territory over in this northwest. So, swings and roundabouts, but some swings are bigger than other roundabouts, I guess. And that's really all to say in the Kursk area. When we come across to Kharkiv, no news of that neck of the woods. Russian forces continued offensive operations north of Kharkiv city near Volchansk and Staritsia, but did not make any confirmed advances, so nothing really to report there. Then we come down to the Kupyansk to Svatove to Kreminna area. And there are claims, remember we have heard that the Russians have pretty much got to the Oskil River. That's a claim here with the Russians knocking on the door there with this village or town of Prokhorivka. And yeah, pretty much on the river, which is very worrying for the Ukrainians. Well, the claim this is from the 19th, so this is a couple of days ago. Russian troops tried to capture the crossing over the Oskil and cut the bridgehead of the armed forces, but their rush was repulsed. 8 BMPs and 3 tanks were destroyed, and another 6 BMPs were damaged by the joint efforts of the Achilles Attack Drone Battalion, guardsmen of the Brevi Brigade and paratroopers of the 77th Assault Brigade. 21 occupants were killed, 26 were injured. So there's video evidence of the attacks here, and the Russians are certainly pushing. Whether they've made it to the river or not, I don't know. I presume it will happen at some point. The question is, what do they do after that? Pushing all the way up here will endanger Kupyansk. Kupyansk is on the Oskil River, and there are elements of the settlement both sides of it. So you would really want to stop the Russians being able to encircle it in any way by moving up here. So it's quite important. Now, up in this area of Kupyansk, there is higher ground here for the Ukrainians to sit on and overlook the Russians, and that does give them an advantage here. But it's going to be very interesting to see what happens around the Oskil River area there. Now, as we come further to the south, we have some activity for the Russians towards Vyshnive here, around Zaliznyanske and Anrivka, not places we particularly mentioned before, but the Russians making some gains. Both mappers broadly agree with where the Russians are at there at the moment. So Andrew Perpetua, although there's some pins there today, it's actually agreeing with what Surat Mats had previously said. And then when we come further to the south, there was a claim the other day actually that the Ukrainians have pushed the Russians back in the Terny area again. So there could be some success for the Ukrainians here, but ostensibly, according to the mappers, no real change there. No change in the Seversk front. Interesting that Andrew Perpetua has some changes around the this is Zaliznyanske? Yeah, Zaliznyanske. That's correct. Goodness me, memory there. So I don't know if you remember, basically when Bakhmut was taken, the Russians obviously got further and further to the north. And there's a river that sort of comes along here. That's basically the line of where the Russians are. So Vasyukivka goes up to Sakharov-Vansety, a small village there that's seen a lot of fighting over the time. The Ukrainians, during a counterattack, when they did take a lot of area back south of Bakhmut, if you remember, they took Klishchivka and they're trying to push to the east south of Klishivka by Andriivka here and Kurdiamivka, and then they kind of stalled out a little bit, and they were also trying to force their way back down this E40 highway down to Prokhorivka and whatnot, but they struggled to. They took a bit of land back, but in the end they didn't get all that far. But it appears that they are in control of more land around here than Andrew originally thought. Surat maps actually having the Russians further to the south there. So interesting that Andrew Perpetua's more charitable to the Russians in that particular area. Anyway, some changes there. Maybe it might not be an attack. It could just be finding evidence to suggest that they definitely do control that area. Now, there's a lot of worry and talk about the Russians having a foothold the other side of the canal and making further gains. And in fact, they are making gains down this highway. Andrew Perpetua stating that, or changing his map to suggest that they're moved further down the T0504 highway that goes, actually, interestingly, that's the one that goes through Konstantinivka and ends up being the one that the Russians are trying to get. And they have indeed got a tiny bit closer to, for the first time in an awful long time, and by Vozdizhenka there. That's a worry because the Russians have been kept at bay there, kept from getting closer to that T0504 highway. But nonetheless, we go back up past Konstantinivka to Chasiv and to Stupochki, where the Russians are sort of trying to take ground here, and that gives them the ability to start to surround Chasiv rather than fighting through it. They'll probably want to get north and south of there. But anyway, the Russians are definitely putting some pressure on the Ukrainians in that area. Here we have the Kyiv Independent saying Russian troops have not gained a foothold across the canal in Chasiv Yar, according to the military. So this could be a bit of trying to control the narrative. Quote, the overall strategic position, they said on the 19th though, so this is 2 days ago, could well have changed, probably has. The overall strategic position of the city remains under the control of Ukraine. Anastasia Bobovnikova, spokesperson of the operational tactical group Luhansk, has said. That is what the Ukrainians are claiming, but the Russians making some gains, I think, there. They certainly appear to be to the west of the canal as it comes further to the south here. So the canal comes down there, and as this is T0504 road, where both mappers seem to agree on that. So I'm not sure that what the Ukrainian General Staff are claiming there, or MOD are claiming, is necessarily still true. Right, then we have some gains for the Russians in the Toretsk area. Some small gains, still within the side what Surat Maps has. Broadly speaking, there's a tiny bit of difference there, but generally no massive changes in. That was already signified by one of the mappers at least. Nonetheless, pressure there. Niu-York seems to have quietened down, as in there doesn't seem to be, and the mappers disagree around here, as you can see by this part of the map, but also null reports I've shown you before doesn't have the Russians in this area at all. This is grey zone, and actually the grey zone's further back, so this is a really charitable interpretation by the Surat Maps and is probably not true, but it is going to be a case of grey zone, no doubt. And then, as mentioned, a tiny bit of a gain towards this town that is kind of a bit of a holdout for the Ukrainians here, stopping the Russians getting any closer to the highway there. Let's hope that they hold out there. And then, as we can see, some fairly substantial gains in the Prokhorivka region, particularly towards Selydove here, which is getting more and more surrounded as the days go by. There's definitely a worry here, as according to Andrew Perpetua, the Russians are getting more and more of a purchase on the western outskirts of the town. Surat Maps has them much further in the town than Andrew Perpetua. And then as we come further to the south, some fairly substantial gains here for the Russians, as they are closing in on a number of these settlements that exist in this kind of pocket of land and water features and probably mining infrastructure as well. So Kurakiva, Vovchenka, these sort of places. The Russians making those gains. Andrew Perpetua showing that now. But I forgot to say at the beginning of the map, I have not got the pins for Surat Maps. It was struggling to import them all. It could have been because there were so many pins. So there have been changes for Andrew Perpetua here. There will be changes for Surat maps. It's just the pins aren't there. So do apologise if there's been any confusion. I should have said that right at the beginning of the mapping update. Okay, and then we come on to Sukha. So that is, remind me. Yeah, here it is. Okay, what's interesting about this small town? It's got there's fighting of these agricultural warehouses to its west, as according to the Surat map some time ago. It hasn't changed too much over the last couple of days, but there are claims that there's evidence of a North Korean flag that has been flown near to Kreminna. North Korea in league with the Russians invading a European country in complete silence from the West, says Jason J. Smart. Our enemies have no fear of the West's reaction. I have seen some commentary on this. So it's not disputed. There is a flag, North Korean flag around there. The question is why? Now, are there North Korean soldiers there? Probably not. So what's going on? This will be some psyops from the Russians. They're messing with the Ukrainians, and they are probably raising that flag to cause chaos, maybe from a local tactical point of view. But I think it's probably something to play with the international audience to say, oh, look how this war's going. Now North Korea involved, what a failure of, say, the Joe Biden administration. Therefore, you should vote Trump in rather than Harris, etc., etc. I think all of these kind of ideas are connected. So I think this is to sow chaos locally with the Ukrainians, thinking, oh my goodness, they're going to send the North Koreans against us as well, but also for that international, it's the optics, isn't it? Damn good cup of tea. Okay, if I don't mind saying so myself, we're going to come down past that large area of land that's taken by the Russians. Although, as mentioned previously, in other places, it's still within the area that Surat Maps has under Russian control. So it's more like agreement than Russians making those gains today, and likewise a little bit further to the south as the Russians move through Maksymilianivka. Now I talked about this in my last video. There is quite a lot of activity going towards Kharkiv. There are claims that it's all horrible for the Russians around here from their own troops, and lots of meat assaults and everything, but they are making these gains. It's the same story that we've heard now for a couple of years. The Russians really keen to take Kharkiv. It's quite an important place, but the Ukrainians are certainly putting up a bit of a fight. There's some footage that's just come out from that area. So this is a leopard of the 33rd Brigade of the Ukrainians in action on the Donetsk front. It's actually the Kharkiv region, this, by other claims from other sources. The crew of the Ukrainian Leopard 2A4 scored several direct hits on Russian armoured vehicles that were moving in a column to attack the positions of the 33rd Brigade of Ukraine. So really interesting here that you've got one tank against a number of vehicles coming on, and the tank seems to do a pretty good job. And this is a Leopard 2A4, not the most recent Leopard, but it is a decent modern Leopard 2 tank, and will have a fire control system that will allow it to acquire its targets before those targets can see it and get those shots in. Whoever gets the first shot generally is going to win that one. So that is picking off a few of those vehicles from a distance and staying safe itself. So really good stuff to see for the Ukrainians in that area. They are employing some of their better tanks here, and indeed I think that's something you're going to see more and more as they cycle through their older tanks, and we see their newer and newer ones be pitted against the Russians on the battlefield. So there, in fact, I've seen a Bradley and an Abrams operate in the Prokhorivka region. I've seen some video. In fact, if I just pop that in, Bradley Abrams, you'll see it. Bradley Abrams. So they are using their best. Yeah, here it is. So epic Ukrainian operated M1 Abrams and a M2 Bradley versus Russian forces in the Kursk region. Sorry, no, it's not in Prokhorivka. This is in Kursk region. So they are using that modern equipment up there and seemingly doing a pretty good job. Interesting that Abrams are being used up in Kursk. I don't think we've seen any destroyed Abrams up there yet, but I might well be wrong. Up in Kursk particularly, I know there have been issues elsewhere in Prokhorivka where they've previously been. Anyway, so yeah, Kharkiv is the scene of quite a lot of mechanized assaults, and activity. And then when we come further to the south, we can see around the Vuhledar area that the Russians have made some further gains, sort of filling in the gaps north of Vuhledar as they are pushing onwards, ever onwards, to try and take kind of all of this region, really is what they want. So Kharkiv is going to be key to that success. And that's pretty much that for the Frontline update today. Really appreciate that you have checked in to watch this. Please like, subscribe and share. That's always appreciated. And check out the live I have in approximately an hour and 20 minutes with Chris Shelton, who's going to be fascinating to talk to. I've interviewed him a couple of times before. He's a former Scientologist who was involved with their core, like almost militaristic element in that. There's like the special group inside. I forget what they're called. The Ocean, the Sea Quest, no, something like that. Anyway, my brain has melted. He's got loads of interesting things to say about Scientology. We're not going to be talking about that tonight. We're going to be talking about cults. So you can come and check that out. That's on A Tippling Philosopher. I'll send out the links in a wee while. But for the meantime, thanks for watching. And don't forget that a bit of news on the NAFO truck front is that it is looking pretty good, and we might be adding another vehicle because we've almost completed this one and haven't even done my live yet. So that's amazing. 17,500 euros, and I will go through on a live. I'll go through the notice board of what people have done and said, and there's a donor wall, 45-person donor wall of things that people have said and donated. But yeah, 145 donations is incredible. So thank you very much for your super kindness on behalf of the 12th NGU, and we might well be adding a second vehicle to that. We're just presently in conversation about that. There could be some choice of adding drones, but apparently the unit does want a second vehicle, if that's at all possible. They'd like that they'd like it for their drone unit. So rather than have drones sent to them, they'd rather they get a vehicle. So it's what they want, right? So I'll update that as and when. But thank you. Anyway, take care, guys. I really appreciate your support. Toodle pips.